Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, and welcome back to Women's View on Ahlulbayt TV. Now, as you all know, that we are back on Women's View, broadcasting every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m, 7:30 p.m, until 9 p.m. Now, today's topic is a very interesting one, and something which many people have requested to do previously. Our topic today is life and death. Now, multitudes of men and women have walked the surface of this earth since the beginning of time until now. We're all from different nationalities, from different cultures. We all speak different languages and have many different skin tones. But there's one thing which is certain for both me, you, and all the viewers around the world, and everyone who is present on this earth, and that is death. As it says in the Holy Quran, that every soul shall taste death. So, inshallah, today we'll be touching upon many of the aspects of life and death. Why is it important to remember death? The concept of death. We're going to be speaking about the concept of life, and inshallah giving it a very interesting angle. Today's guest is Sister Nargis, who will be inshallah sharing her experiences and her knowledge on this topic. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'd like to say, Sister Zahra, that it's an absolute pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off by speaking about my own personal experience about death. Children do not understand the concept of death, let alone life and death. They don't understand what it means to have somebody pass away. Adults, again, I don't think fully understand the concept. As a child, it's more difficult to comprehend and appreciate the consequences that will follow. At the age of 6, I lost my mother, who passed away. To this day, I don't know what the reason behind that was. We were on a family holiday abroad with my siblings and my parents, and my mother fell ill. Being the eldest of the 4 siblings, and the youngest at the time was a year and a half, who was also quite ill because she kept on going through she had her own health issues. So she looked more like a 6-month-old child rather than a year and a half. So it was quite demanding to look after her. When my mother passed away, I remember her being ill, and I remember her having what's called a drip on, and it was in the house. She had a drip in the house, and because these flashes I have, and regardless of them being years ago, it's flashes in my memory that I can never take out.
Yeah.
I remember it was during February time abroad. She had a drip on, and I was asked by my aunties, my cousins, to go and check if the drip had finished, because had her circulation been continuing, it would have finished. I remember coming and seeing that it hadn't. She was asleep, or her eyes were closed. And I remember going back and telling my cousins that it hadn't. And I remember them actually shouting at me as if I'd made a mistake, that how can it not finish? I remember then people following and going to see her. And then all I remember is screaming and shouting starts. For them to actually see her, that there was no life in her body left. Because apparently the drip was halfway through, and that must have been a time when she had passed away. I remember, and I can recall at that time, that no tears came down my cheek, because I was in shock. Being a 6-year-old, I couldn't appreciate what was going on.
Did you understand the concept of death?
I don't think I understood the concept of death, because there was, at the time, we were obviously watching televisions, and we saw films, and you knew death, but not understanding what death was. Not understanding that I would actually never see her again. I would have actually never speak to her again. but understanding something big has just happened and not putting everything else in the jigsaws.
Yeah.
I remember standing there, and I remember my first instinct being looking towards my siblings, because being the eldest in the family, well, I was 6 years old, but suddenly not having the mother figure there, my instinctive reaction was to look at where everybody else was, and I couldn't see my brother, I could see my other sisters crying, and everyone, because they cried not knowing what had happened, but crying because they could hear the screams and the cries, because they were too young to appreciate that. Then I remember sitting when my mum was in her deathbed before being buried, because she wasn't buried for a number of days. I remember sitting next to her, and I remember just holding on to one of the poles next to her and trying to feel and understand that what does this now mean, you know, trying to appreciate what this now means. But absorbing the feeling that she's not going to speak again. But not understanding what is going to happen, because obviously it's a big question mark. I also remember, because I was very close to my mum, whatever little few, I remember just a handful of moments with her, and I can never forget that. I don't remember everything, I was too young. But I remember her waking up during the night, I remember her praying, and I remember her playing with us. And I remember rushing through the doors where her ghusl was taking place, because ladies had taken her and I didn't know what they were going to do. Because I knew she was going to be buried at some point, but I thought maybe this is the time they've taken her to be buried. And I wanted to be close to her as much as possible, whatever possibility that was. Now, that obviously chapter, whether it was chapter which opened or closed, I don't know how to signify that. That death took place. Now, shortly after, my father remarried. My father remarried my mother's sister. God bless her. She was married, she got married to my father. My father chose her because even though my mum was ill, my aunt used to look after us in a very similar way to how my sister now looks after her rest of the my nephews and nieces. And she had a maternal instinct. So my father found some comfort that rather than a stranger coming into the family, who best to look after these kids like their mother, to be mother's sister.
Exactly.
Now, God bless her, she took on this role pretty much at the age of 18, taking over 4 children. Although they weren't her children, they were her sister's children. But even in this day and age, it's hard enough to look after one which is your own than taking on a massive responsibility. So may Allah bless her for that. Whatever experiences I had, or whatever psychological or emotional feelings I went through in my life, they then by no means undermine her responsibility or her way of dealing with the situation. It's something natural which a person goes through when they lose something which cannot be ever fulfilled. Now, growing up, I felt there was a massive gap in my life. Although, may Allah bless her, my mother now did her very best, her utmost. There was a gap in my life because I was conscious of this. I was conscious that my mother had passed away. I was conscious of it, and maybe now looking back, the research, the Western research, I'm not sure how applicable it is to the Eastern side of things. But in Western research, there are stages of bereavement. You know, a person goes to denial where they can't accept the fact that they've actually lost somebody. A person goes through anger because they're angry at why this is happening. Subsequently, depression, and then eventually acceptance of the fact. I think during most of my childhood, I was stuck in the cycle of anger. I was angry. There's times, may Allah forgive me, I was angry at God. Not understanding how this was fair. Felt it was unjust. Justice had not been done. Fine, life and death. Fine, people die, but why was it that my mother was taken away at the age of 25 with 4 children that were left behind? Why was it that, especially when I saw other people with their parents and even their grandparents, I felt this pain inside me. I wouldn't say it was jealousy. I'd hate to think that it was jealousy, but there was something in me which made my pain, come to light again, and I didn't understand what that was, why that was happening. I was angry with God for choosing our mother, because although death took place amongst the world, with the earthquakes, with the tsunamis, not even on an individual basis, but hundreds even, and thousands at one go. My sympathy was non-existent. I did not sympathize with other people because I always felt that my pain was greater. I felt that, fine, okay, when I was told, when I was growing up and I was told, oh, blah, blah's parents passed away, and I remember instinctively asking, how old was that person? And when I've been told 55 or 65, I'm like, well, they've lived their life. My reaction was very defensive, and I was stuck there. I was stuck there for quite a long period. 8 years ago, my father, may Allah bless his soul, died in a car accident. He wasn't the only person in the car. There were 3 of his cousins, and all 4. There was a tragic accident. All 4 died on the same day. He was 47. Now, again, it was something which instigated that pain again. He was, regardless of there being other members of my family, he was the backbone to my family. He was somebody who kept everything together, the siblings together, everybody else together. And losing him the way we did, and he was abroad at the time, I started reliving the anger. I started to have thoughts that a Mormon person should not be having. And the only explanation now, with hindsight, I can give is because I did not understand the whole concept. Now, the more I read about our Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet's family and the sacrifices, regardless of how much you read, until there is something in your heart which is awake, which is appreciating what you're trying to read and absorb the material, you're going to be very ignorant of understanding that knowledge. Now, earlier this year, in February, I made the trip to Damascus to visit Bibi Zainab al-Islam. Now, I spent a week there, and most of the week I was right beside the Rosa. And I did a lot of reading, and something happened on that trip. Somehow and suddenly my pains were insignificant. What was taken away from me was insignificant. I started appreciating the sacrifices that the holy household made, the pains they went through. Now, the tragic atrocities Bibi Zainab al-Islam went through, and still on the other side, coming out of it with steadfastness and perseverance, and actually saying, Alhamdulillah, this is the will of God, and accepting it as the will of God, actually shook me up. It made me realize that what life and death was about. That my whole life I could not understand death because I never understood what life was. You know, why, I mean, there's a saying in the Quran I came across, and I've written it down, and it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran, so do you think that we have created you but for naught, and that you would not be returned to us for account? It just reflects and shows that there's a purpose to everything. We haven't just been created and are meant to live and then go through the ups and downs of life and get absorbed in this worldly life and start taking things, even death, in a materialistic way. You know, holding on to something which is inevitable, it is going to happen, but not learning from what actually you are going through and what the reason behind that is. It's completely natural. A person goes through loss. I understand that now. There's always going to be tears. It's a natural, we're emotional creatures, it's a natural reaction. But understanding that it's not necessarily something which is best for us, but it's Allah's will. And I have done astaghfar for actually questioning His will during my adolescence, and questioning why and how could have this been good for us, etc., etc. But coming back to Bibi Zainab al-Islam, now this is obviously the month of Muharram. And many narrations say that Imam Ali al-Islam, Bibi Zainab al-Islam, Bibi Fatima, Zahra al-Islam, everyone knew Karbala was going to take place. They were aware of it. It doesn't mean that you change your route because you know, or maybe if we know we might die if we cross the road outside the studios, it doesn't mean that we stay indoors the rest of our life. It's Allah's will. If it's going to happen, we accept it. It's going to happen. But the tragedies in Karbala, because of the piety that they were in, the state that they were in, they were aware that this was going to happen, but they never at any point questioned Allah's will. And I say that only because very recently a friend of mine asked me this question, saying that if life and death is written, on which we've been told that when a person's born is written, and when a person dies is written, if it is written, then why is it that the Shia Muslims in this world mourn Karbala? You know, if it's something it was inevitable that 72 people were going to be sacrificed that day, then why is it that we mourn that day? Because are we not then questioning Allah's will? Now, it was a very interesting question because it made me think. And the only understanding of the answer I could give is, it's not we don't mourn for the death of Imam Hussein al-Islam, because death is Allah's will, but we mourn for how that death came about. Yes. Now, how that death came about and their submission to Allah's will is we mourn because we want to keep that submission alive to this day. It's something which follows on through the lineage, and we want to keep it alive. We want people to realize, we want the Yazids and the Walids of this world to realize that it's not something which is forgotten just because it was several hundred years ago. We still understand. Politics still exists in this day and age. And the whole situation that took place back in Karbala originated from politics. It originated, it wasn't because it was a fight between religions, although Yazid claimed to be Muslim. It was because he was aware what happened during the Caliphate of Imam Ali alayhi salam may repeat itself with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Being aware that the Ummah will actually stand and Imam Hussein alayhi salam will be regarded as more prestige person than Yazid. He was out there to make an example, which really backfired because the example still exists, but not something which is positive for him in any regard. So I think it's important to, during this period, touch upon that because it's something which Shias have been criticized for mourning the death, because in somehow they feel that it's actually questioning the will of Allah, which is absolutely not doing. Now, for me, during my life, the experiences I went through and the effect it had on my way of thinking has completely changed. And it does change when you accept that death is something which is inevitable and guaranteed, and it's something which is Allah's will. You see things in a completely different perspective rather than feeling lonely and being selfish about that thought. You see things in a different angle, which you can use that, you can utilize that feeling to actually benefit the people you've lost and actually benefit the people who are alive, to make sure that they achieve the best deeds, which will then ultimately help them in their afterlife, inshallah.
Inshallah. Definitely. I mean, your experiences has just really touched me, you describing that, because many people don't experience the concept of death or someone close by them passing away, so they don't really understand the concept of death. We are going off for a quick break in a few minutes, but we have some comments being sent in, we have some emails being sent in, so I really want to read some of them out, inshallah, after the break as well. Just before we go off, I just want to mention, just you describing your experiences and saying, it benefits some people because it reminds them of death as well. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, many people would know that within the community in London, a young boy passed away. He was 23 years old, so it was just random as well. It was he was walking out his house and he went, I think, through an estate, and there was a disposal truck which was reversing, and it actually hit into him. So when the police, they called the police, he died. He was pronounced dead on the spot, so on location. So that actually shook a lot of people, and then there was a Facebook group that was created, and many youth were saying, it's just realizing the concept of death makes them better beings, and it helps them improve upon their life. So we can speak more about life and death after the break, inshallah. We have to go off in a few minutes, so we'll come back after the break. For the audience at home, you just heard Nargis's very touching experience about experiencing someone close by passing away. Inshallah, after the break, we'll come back. We'll be speaking more about life and death, so stay tuned, and we'll be back in a few minutes where we continue on this topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.